I'm Rob from Barefoot Gaming, and it is about time we review the Oculus Go and the Oculus Quest. Let's do this! Now, in case you're asking yourself why it's taken us so long to go into the mobile market, it's kind of been its own market. That's just it. And the Quest has been pushing that less and less to be the case. It is becoming kind of something that should be noticed. And I mean, if we're gonna notice it, we're gonna review it. So I've got a Go, I've got a Quest, I've even got the granddaddy Gear VR, which we're not going to do anything with. That's just where it all came from. Again, its little bitty controller can go away as well. Now, there are a ton of specs to go through, and I'm going to try to keep it both fast and interesting. So buckle up, here goes. The Oculus Go has a 32 and 64 gig version. The Oculus Quest has a 64 and 128 gig version. So the Go halfway on the bottom, halfway on the top. All that means is how much storage they have for either movies, for games, for apps, all that sort of stuff. So they kind of have different purposes. The Go was never really designed to be a gaming rig, whereas the Quest definitely is, so it needs more space. Now, the resolution is also something really important to talk about. The Go has a single LCD, so it is 2560 by 1440, and the Quest is 1440 by 1600. Yes, and I'm also going to mention the Rift S just as a comparison, just so you know what the big brother to the Quest is when you're actually plugged into the PC. I'm not going to talk about the link cable today. We'll do that in the future. I'm not going to talk about sideloading. We're just going to talk about hardware. We're going to talk about how it performs and how the games actually compare to each other. Now, the Rift S has an LCD screen, 1280 by 1440. I should mention the Quest runs an OLED screen, and the Go has an LCD screen as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The field of view on all of the Oculus systems is 90 degrees. So really hard to explain without going into details, but your field of view is just how wide you're actually seeing everything, right? So the smaller the field, the more it feels like you're looking through binoculars. To put that into perspective, the original HTC Vive was at 110 degrees field of view, and the Valve Index is at 130 is what they have it listed as. And I don't know if that's exactly right. Even the 90 I would kind of question, but they do all have a slightly smaller field of view. How much that matters is up to you, but there's so much to balance in. That's just one part of the equation. But something that is really important is your IPD, your interpupillary distance. How far the black dots are in between your eyes, because if that doesn't line up, everything seems out of focus. So not only does it strain your eyes, it'll give you headaches, it makes VR less comfortable. And the Oculus Go has a single IPD, just like the Rift S. And actually, even the numbers are the same. They're both fixed at 63.5, so you can't move them around. Hopefully it's good for the majority of the people. It will be fine, but if 63.5 or around that on either side, and there is quite a bit of play, then you're good to go. Now, the actual Quest has a slider on the bottom. Let me double check to make sure I'm remembering right. Yeah, on the left-hand side on the bottom, it has an IPD slider, and it runs between 58 and 72. So, and again, it'll go a little bit more on both sides, so this has way more range for your interpupillary distance. Tracking is the next thing. Now, the Go is pretty straightforward. It uses an accelerometer. It uses, you can look around with your head, but if you move your head forward or backwards, it's not tracking you at all. The Oculus Quest, just like the Rift S, will use full 6 degrees of freedom room scale. So the Go is considered 3 degrees. They both require lighting to be able to track, but they do a good job with tracking. And the Rift S, since we did our review like 300 years ago, their tracking has improved dramatically with software. So the Quest, unless I was playing in like near complete darkness, tracking was great. As to games, now the Oculus Go has dozens of games. Now, that's not an awful lot. The Quest, unfortunately, is still sitting at dozens as well. However, this is growing quite fast. Now, if you look at the Rift S, for example, or the OG Rift, there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of games. And slowly but surely, all the big titles are pushing their way into the Quest market, trying to make that larger and larger. That is something you should be aware of, though, going into any of these sets, is you're going to have less games to choose from. Back to controllers, I touched on them before. So the Go has a controller that looks I'm going to show a little picture of it so you can see it better. But it's just a tiny little thing that you hold in your hand. It's got a trackpad, it's got a back button, the Oculus button, and it's got a trigger. So for games like fishing, for example, or if you want to watch like big screen beta, this works totally great. If, however, you want to play games that actually track where your hands are, well, now we're back to the proper tracking system. Now, the Oculus Quest uses the exact same trackers as the Rift S. So because it uses the cameras to view what's happening around you, the trackers work great. You can kind of lose... So the Rift S, again, without burying you in details, the Rift S has cameras further back on the side. So it'll do a little bit of a better job tracking your hand as it moves kind of to the side of your head. And you're going to say, when is that ever going to come into play? It does come into play sometimes. I didn't run into that with any Quest games, but that's because there are way less Quest games. So take that for what it is. Another thing I'm going to mention, as I'm mentioning peripherals, is both the Go and the Quest have glasses spacers. So the Go is kind of like a little rubber thing that pushes it off, give you just a little bit more room inside of your headset. And the Quest is plastic and it pushes it a little bit further away. Just keep in mind, the further away you are from the screen, the smaller the sweet spot. And we should talk about the sweet spot next. The sweet spot on all of the Oculus systems is listed by Oculus as 2 millimeters. And it is super complicated to try to explain exactly how that compares, because everyone's face shape is going to determine how everything sits on your face. I am going to mention the fact that the closer you are to the screen, the bigger the field of view, and generally the larger the sweet spot. Now, what a sweet spot is, or how I'm defining it, if nothing else, is the fact that that is where everything looks crystal clear. If everything looks off a little bit, well, it's because it moved up your head, or it moved a little bit to the left, or a little bit down. So the sweet spot is ideally where you want your eyes to be, including the IPD. As you can tell, this gets quite complicated, but 2 millimeters, that's the sweet spot. Audio is integrated on all the headsets, on the Oculus Go, on the Oculus Quest, on the Rift S. Oculus has this thing now for loving to build the audio into getting it running down your straps. And it sounds okay. It does a neat job in that it shouldn't sound as good as it does, but it's not rich sounding. And you can kind of hear it. If somebody's sitting beside you, they're definitely going to know you're either watching a movie or playing a game. Speaking of comfort, this is really, really big in VR, because if it doesn't feel good sitting on your head or pressing against your face, you're not going to want to be in there for very long. Let's talk about the weight of the different headsets. Now, the Oculus Go weighs 468 grams, which is about a pound or 16.5 ounces. The Oculus Quest is 571 grams, which is 1.3 pounds. And about 20.1 ounces, and the Rift S is 500 grams, which is 1.1 pound, which is about 17.6 ounces. So the Quest is definitely the heaviest of all of them, and that's because it's got to have all the processor inside of the headset, whereas the Rift S can get all of its processing power running through the cable that's running to your computer. Now, the battery life on the Go is listed at 1.5 to 2 hours. The listing for the Quest is 2 to 3 hours, and then the Rift S is infinite. Now, I'm calling bogus on the 1.5 to 2 hours. That is like peak amazing. You know, the sun is in the right spot, the moon is in the right spot, everything is exactly where it needs to be. Because when I pulled the Go out of the box the very first time, one of the first apps I ran was Big Screen VR, and I couldn't watch a whole movie. An hour and a half, I got like an hour and 20 minutes in, and it was done. It was flashing on the screen saying, you know, your battery's about to die. And I had fully charged it. So I have played with it since. I'm going to say that 1.5 hours is kind of max on the Go. Maybe there are apps out there or videos out there that aren't as demanding, but it's a bit of a stretch. On the Quest side, however, I would say that is pretty accurate. Between 2 and 3 hours shouldn't be a problem, even if you're gaming pretty hard, in my own personal experience. Now, the last thing before I talk about games is I'm going to talk about the Guardian system that both the Quest and the Rift S have. Now, I've reviewed the Rift S. I'm not going to talk about that again. But the first time you put on the Quest, it'll ask you, do you want to trace out the room? Do you want it to be room scale? Do you want it to be standing or seated only? And it's really, really intuitive. You just point your controller, you draw a line on the floor. It'll tell you if it's big enough. You can move furniture out of the way. And if you get close to the perimeter, boom, you straight it pass through and you can see everything kind of like black and white, as in you're seeing your actual room. It's a very well-designed system, and their inside, like their tracking system has improved so greatly since the Rift S first came out, and it works fantastically in the Quest. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a gamer, and being a gamer, I want to push this thing through the limits. Now, the Go, I played with the games a little bit. I'm not really going to touch on that. It can play some games. It can play fishing. It can play a couple of things. It has some neat productivity apps. The mic works well on both of them, but the Go is really not a gaming system, and Oculus hasn't been pushing games in its direction very much. So there's a couple, but not a lot. The Quest, however, so I wanted to test this thing out with the essentials of the VR games, what I think every owner should have. So I wanted to test it with Beat Saber, with Racket NX, with Box VR, with Richie's Plank, with Space Pirate Trainer, and I wanted to see how well it actually stands up, because again, this doesn't have a 1070, a 1080, a 2080 Ti video card pushing through it. It's got a mobile processor inside of it, and let's see how it does. Now, Beat Saber isn't a very complicated game, and you'll know that going into it. It's a very fun game, and I highly recommend it, but it's not very complicated. And really the only place that I saw a big difference between going with the wired version, like on a Rift S or an Index or any other wired headset versus the Quest, is you're missing some of the lighting effects. Like, it's not, your sabers don't glow exactly the same. You're not getting the same level of reflection, but the gameplay is bang on. Racket NX is another game that I think a lot of people have maybe not had on their radar and should. This is a game where you are playing basically racquetball in a futuristic sphere, and you're smacking the ball back around, and you're trying to hit the pluses to increase your time. You're trying to, hit these targets, and it just feels really good. It feels really fun. They did a good job porting it. The biggest thing here too is reflections, and I think I'm gonna say across the board that is something that any developer that is moving from wired VR to wireless VR, it's something that they're willing to let go, and I think it's a good idea for the added immersion, the added, like, it looks super cool. Don't get me wrong; those reflections are fantastic in wired, but Racket NX does a really good job. It looks good and it plays the same. Now, I can't talk burning calories without mentioning Box VR. This is a game that when I originally reviewed it, I thought this isn't going to be great. It looks like Audio Shield, or it looks like Beat Saber, it looks like, but instead what this is a game, and I'm going to call it a game because it's more of a workout. This is a home gym. And if you want to spend any amount of time every day to just make yourself sore, Box VR is what you're looking for. They've reduced the quality of the environments. They've reduced the visuals of the orbs that are coming at you. Everything that moves around you doesn't look as good, but it's fully functional and it still looks good. So Box VR, again, is not only highly recommended on the Quest, but they've actually added packs to it on the Quest that you can't get on Steam, or you can't get on the Oculus Store yet for the Rift S or for any of the other headsets. But they're coming, just Quest first in this case. Next up is Richie's Plank experience, and I cannot stress enough that this needs to not only be in your library, but you need a physical plank. There is something psychological about stepping up onto a plank in virtual reality that will make you forget you are in your basement, or you're in your living room, or you're in your bedroom. The longer the plank, the better. The higher you can elevate it, so you actually have to step up onto it. But Richie's Plank translates pretty well. There are some graphical downgrades, like the actual skinning on the buildings and stuff doesn't look as good. But the thing with Richie's Plank is it doesn't have to look photorealistic. In fact, that whole uncanny valley aspect of it not looking realistic is part of what transports you into, like, being afraid of heights. So they did a really good job, and Richie's Plank experience, as a side note, you have to have this game. They did a great job, and I want to see what they're coming out with next. The last one I tested for this review was Space Pirate Trainer. Now, this is the old go-to wave shooter, and this one, more than anything else, I actually noticed a visual downgrade. It did a good job reaching over your shoulder, grabbing your shield, changing your weapons. Everything still works exactly as it should, but visually, everything looked reduced. It still looks good. Again, if you haven't tried the wired versions, you're not going to be missing anything. It's a great looking game. It's lots of fun. It works really well, but it is a fairly large kick in the pants as far as in the graphics department, how much of a downgrade they had to make. Now, based on subpixels, the Go actually has less screen door than the Quest, but that is only part of all the things you have to take into account, because the Quest has like better contrast, the Quest has better colors, the LCD versus LED, there's just so many things, but they're designed to do two different things. The pro for the Quest is it does everything very, very well. The pro for the Go is it's a really good movie watcher, and it's okay if you just kind of want to play around a little bit with apps and kind of basic games. The tracking on the Quest is fantastic. That is a major pro. Con is going to be, I dislike light leakage around the nose, and there's a lot of light leakage around the nose. I found the Quest actually quite uncomfortable because of the way it's positioned, how much pressure it's putting on my face. That is something I am going to be working on. In upcoming videos, we are going to figure out how to make this Quest comfortable, because as it stands, it is not. And it is too much fun to not have it be comfortable. I will figure out how to do this, and I will show you when I figure it out. I still think these controllers are too small. I like the fact that they're magnetic, you can pull them out easily, you can change batteries easily, but for the size of my hands, these controllers feel too small, and they always feel like they're gonna pop out of my hand. Clearly, size of your hand is gonna matter. Obviously, people will have different preferences as to what feels the best, but for me, this feels, it doesn't sit quite comfortable in my hand. Something else that I am going to figure out how to fix, because everything about this is really, really cool, and I don't want that being a restriction. There's not as many games as I would like, but that is something that will scale up. With all of those cons being said, all of the specs being listed, this is a fantastic system. The Quest is a wonderful standalone VR headset. If you have a Rift S, should you also have a Quest? You know what, if you want it for portability, if you don't like the idea of wires, it has some drawbacks in the sense that you're gonna take a kick on the graphics, but the tracking is going to work as well. If you want the Go, really just know what you're going into it for. It's hard for me to recommend the Go unless you know exactly what you're going to be doing with it. Now, if you're using this to watch movies, it works fantastic, except for the battery. And if you're going to watch movies, make sure you have a battery pack or get a longer cable so you can plug this into the wall and actually be able to charge it. It doesn't come with a wall charger. Another minor quibble with the Go. The Quest does. That is the review of the actual hardware. Now, since we've reviewed all the hardware, clearly we're going to have to start reviewing some Quest games in the future as well. But if you have any questions about this review, any of this hardware, I'm easy to get a hold of. Subscribe, like, comment. I always love hearing from you. And if you have solutions for how to make this sucker more comfortable, how to make the controllers feel better, post them down below. I want to know, and I want to share them with everybody else. Thank you so much for watching another Barefoot Gaming review. We'll talk to you again real soon. See ya.